Hey, how's it going, everybody? Thanks again. This is MJ, Breathe, Move, Shine, and a couple of people have asked me to give a little bit more clear understanding of what props are for. So I thought we would do a proper class, using props, and I'll briefly describe each of them here as you see them. But the first thing I'd like to say is that if you can't get every single bit of this, for example, this is pretty big and lumpy to carry around, this big bolster, at least always have with you when you travel to class 2 blocks, and I have one under me, as I always do when I'm sitting, and your mat, and at least have the 2 blocks with you. That'd be ideal. So we might as well start with that. The mat is something that is particular to everybody's sort of way they like to feel comfortable on it. But what I want to tell you is be careful about some of the mats that are out there tend to be a little bit on the slippery side, and that's okay if you're on a carpet or something. But for example, I'm on a dance floor here, and some of the mats that I have it's like a surfboard. I'm all over the place. The thick mats that are kind of foamy, the really thick ones are too thick. This one is about 1/8 of an inch, and it seems to grab to the floor really well. So wood floors, dance floors, just watch out for your mat slipping underneath of you. That can be kind of scary sometimes. Okay, so from the ground up, right? So then 2 blocks, these are the foam blocks that you've seen around. There are cork blocks available. I'll preface all of this by saying I have seen all different price points for these online. I would say read the reviews and also talk to other people about their experience with those. You can always contact me. I'm happy to help you out with that. Any questions you may have about that. I like the foam blocks. They have a little bit of a give to them, so that if I'm using it, for example, to prop bones, which I mostly am, whether it's my wrists, or my back somewhere, it has a little bit of give to it. Others prefer the cork. They really like the stiffness of it. They're very heavy. So just have a look. If you can get to a store that actually has these items, I highly recommend getting your hands on all of this stuff. Take it for a test drive. So 2 blocks on the mat, that's like fairly mandatory to have as you travel to your classes. Okay, and then blankets, the Mexico blankets, I've seen these online anywhere from $13 to $40. Now, I would say $13, you're probably gonna get something that's pretty thin, and that's not awful. I have some of those thin blankets myself. These are the sort of thicker ones, but they're wonderful, and they have a particular texture to them and a weave that helps them to stick together. So when I roll it into a rolled shape, for example, if we're gonna use this to support our spine for a shape, which I'll show you, it makes a really nice tight little bind. So now you could use a regular blanket, but if it's fleece, it's gonna slip. So that's the reason we really like the cotton or wool woven blankets for this. So here's an example of how nice it would be somewhere down the line when you're asked to do a supported spine pose. You'll set this roll behind you and just let the spine come down on top of it and set up this beautiful rising up of the spine in the front side of the body. And I'm gonna have a hard time getting up because this feels really nice. So I'm gonna come on back up. And so that's the reason that we like to have at least one of these blankets on hand. If at some point in the future you're gonna join me for a restorative class, honestly, 3 of these. But at least have one in your realm, okay? Finally, well, not quite finally, the bolster, as I mentioned earlier, these are big, bulky. It's almost like a small couch. Now, these are hugely beneficial for a particular kind of class that I like to guide you in. It's a yin yoga class. Always have water too, by the way. So in this case, for example, the bolster can serve to raise up a surface area on which we can place hips, for example. Okay, and setting us up for this big, tall Sphinx pose, which is quite lovely. Expanding the front side of the body, the hip flexors, the low abs. And then if I come back, the other thing it can do is make this really beautiful supported child's pose, where I let the head come through my arms and just let that head, if it doesn't quite get to the floor, I'm probably gonna use a blanket or a block to catch my head down here. So that's what the big bolster is for, along with numerous other amazing postures that we're going to be investigating along the way as we travel together. So that's the bolster. See if you could find yourself one of these. And like I said, 2 or 3 of these, but one is fine. 2 blocks. And then finally the strap. So I don't know what you have on hand, but what I thought we could do is just share a kind of a quick practice so that I can demonstrate how all of these work. So we're going to start our practice with a strap today. And the strap could be an amazingly elaborate item that you receive from a fitness store or yoga store, or it could just be a length of webbing, cotton webbing preferably, that you can get at any of the sewing stores or the crafting stores. My plan is to make a whole bunch of these and give them to people so they have them. This one happens to be about 10 feet long. There are some slightly shorter ones. I would say don't go as short as, say, 5 feet, because every now and then what we're going to do is we're going to use the strap to, use on like pretty much the whole body. So you want to make sure it's 8 or 10 feet, 6 feet at least. So we'll have a seat, and generally I like to start seated. I have my legs folded under me. But in this case, I could also use a block, always a really, really great option. It helps you to sit taller with a block under you or with your legs under you. If I take the block away or my legs away and I sit on the floor, what I find is it's kind of tricky to stack the spine up if I'm this low to the ground, right? So what is useful is to get your block back, put it under the sits bones, make sure that you place it in a way that both of those sits bones are connecting to that surface, and then set it up where you feel safe and you can hang out here for a bit of time. So like, as always, we build from the ground up, and that's what we're doing here, all right? So we'll take the strap back, and I'm gonna put it at about, looks like about 4 feet or so in front of me. And I'm gonna put a fairly good grip on it without gripping too hard, okay? And then as I do so, as I have this belt kind of straight in front of my chest, I'm gonna just make sure that the spine is tall, and I'm gonna make sure that there's a stacking of the hips and the shoulders and my head in a nice straight line. And then what I'm gonna do is start to put this very tautly in front of me, this belt, and then reach it up overhead. And right away, I bet you any money you're probably feeling some really nice range show up around the shoulders or the elbows or somewhere in the top of your back. I love this for a million reasons, okay? So one of them would be to actually let that belt come behind me, the strap come behind me. And because we spend so much time curled over our devices, this might feel really obtuse in your body, but that's the reason we do it, because we want to make sure that we still always have that wide open front body thing going on in our whole life, basically. All right, so I'm just going to do that a few times, and already I feel arms warming up, I feel the shoulders warming up. We want to make sure that my jawline is relaxed and I'm moving the breath in really huge ways. Then I'm going to pop that right overhead. Maybe I'm going to let my gaze come up. And then exhale, send the gaze back forward. And then I'm going to wait for the exhale to let the right arm come down and the left arm reach tall. And I'm really just going to let that go fairly organically side to side. Now, it's crucial to be sure that I'm going to turn around a little bit for you guys, that you can see that your shoulder blades, as I do this, aren't wonking around and kind of losing their integrity all over the place. I like to make sure that the shoulder blades are clipped gently but firmly behind me in fairly one place, okay? Otherwise, we may set up a condition for some discomfort in the upper back. So we love to make sure that the front body and the back body are equally strong in our practices. And then, of course, we could come back to center and start a spinal twist. And it's nice to make sure, if it turns out, wait, that's way too wide or way too far away, you can make adjustments. And I'm going to ask you here, what's the most important thing that we're doing right here? It's breathing. Because first the breath shows up and then the movements. And just quickly noted, as always, we're looking for 6 major spinal movements. This would be the side to side, obviously. We're going to come now back to center and overhead. And I'm going to use an exhale to curve the spine and bring the strap down. And then in breath, come on back up. So that's 2 more of the 6, yeah? Very nice. So this is forward and back. Now what we're going to do, we did this a little earlier, was the side to side, but I'm going to add a little bit of range to the spine, actually curving side to side by widening my feet, my legs. I have a nice strong foundation for all this to happen. Just feeling pretty darn good, honestly. And then I'm going to come back to center. And just for the heck of it, I'm going to let my gaze come up. See if I can soften my jawline, really engage around the core, keep the breath going, and then exhale, bring the whole thing back down. So nice and slow. We don't have to move fast, right? And then just going to shake off those arms. There's a pretty good chance there's some congestion in your wrist, so we're going to do this because why not? And then a few times. There's another really cool one that I'm going to borrow from one of our favorite teachers, where you start with the wrists together. And what I'm going to do is try to make contact of the wrists all the way around. It's a pretty good trick, yeah? So if you look at my hand, it looks almost like a cute little flower butterfly thing going on. And then I'm going to switch it. All right, so that's strap. That's strap. So I thought we would move into a few shapes with our blocks so that I can show you how massively beneficial it is to have blocks. In essence, what the blocks do is they lend length to an arm or a body part that can't quite get to the floor. All right? So take your blocks, and we're going to move, and we're just going to have these in our hands most of the time for a few minutes here. Let's go ahead and stand up. Might as well start at the front of the mat. And I'm going to place these in this area. Move my stuff out of the way. That's about, I don't know, a little bit wider than my shoulders. That's going to be okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is rise myself up nice and tall. Nice. And I'm going to get a nice big reach off my mountain pose, Tadasana. Of course, I'm earthing the feet, and I'm engaging the legs and the spine and the core all the way up. And then as I exhale, I'm welcoming myself to the practice and welcome you here too as well. All right, and so exhale, super slow forward fold, the knees are bent. Gonna take my blocks and place them roughly under my shoulders. Then from here, I'm gonna place the fingers on the front of that block. It makes a little waterfall of fingers. And the reason for that is it takes the heat off the wrist. You're gonna notice as you shift your hands forward and back on the block, wow, that feels a whole lot better for me. It's just my shared experience with a couple of my favorite teachers. All right. So the thing about the blocks is you can also go on a low setting. And if you feel really secure, you can go to the tall setting too. But for our purposes today, we're going to go low, okay? If you need the medium, go for it. All right, so it's a forward fold. Then I'm going to set my gaze up on an in-breath and halfway lift myself, spine parallel to the floor. As I exhale, I'm going to send my gaze behind me so I could see the back of the mat. So when I halfway lift again and start to lift up the right leg and start to press it behind me, well, it's really cool because I got these blocks to help support me, you know, or you could be here. But I got the blocks in place. And then I'm going to watch my foot come down hip distant wide. So here's our low lunge with the blocks. Okay, as opposed to no blocks. For a lot of people, this is way too much. So we're going to use the blocks the whole time here for a little bit, all right? Nice, okay. And then I'm going to exhale, a little bit of a bend in the back knee, and start to pop that leg forward. Well, you see, I don't know, for you, it may be way easier because you got the blocks in place to hold you. All right, and we'll check out the other side this time. All right, make sure your hands are comfortable, make sure those blocks are in place, that you feel secure and safe. Raise up the left leg, press it behind you. Watch that foot, you know? I mean, I'm watching it hopefully land hip distant wide. So I have a nice long line from the top of my head all the way to the back heel. The heel in the backyard, I like to say. And then I'm going to use the breath to travel that front leg forward again. Excellent. And then I'm going to in-breath myself all the way tall just to come to neutral again. And exhale, come on down. All right, we'll start to move a little bit. So in-breath, up we come. Exhale, forward fold. I'm going to keep my blocks nearby. Again, I'm going to step that right leg back. Then I'm going to let the back knee come down. And then, 10 minutes. And then I'm going to start to straighten the front legs and bring the blocks and my arms back with me. So that when we lengthen the front leg, we want to make sure your arms aren't out here to start. They're right under your shoulders so that you set up a really nice, strong support system. All right, so that's our half Hanumanasana. And then we'll come back forward into the lunge. And then just for the heck of it, to see how strong we're feeling today, this is optional. I'm going to make sure my hands feel safe on the block and travel that left leg back for a plank for a few times. I'm just going to give you a quick demo of what chaturanga could be like, doesn't have to be, when you can send the chest through the blocks and then come to your up face dog here on the blocks. Pretty sensational. All right, exhale, come on back, and travel myself back to the front of the mat. So we'll check out the other side. Come on up for an in-breath. And exhale. And then we'll breathe ourselves up again. Exhale, fold. This time, halfway lifting, send my gaze back and my left foot back. There's my low lunge again. I'm really making sure those blocks always end up under my shoulders. Surrender the back knee down. Travel the blocks back as I lengthen the front leg. Now from here, if you have the range, most certainly you can come forward if you wish to. But that's not the goal. The goal is to have a nice long spine and to keep breathing. Nice. All right. And then we'll come off that back knee, come into the lunge, see if I feel like hanging out in plank a little bit, play around. If you like to try the chaturanga with the knees down, awesome option, because look at this, I can go all the way down, send myself all the way back up. And if I'm ready, a little tricky with the blocks, I can exhale to down face dog. Please always make sure that you feel safe and secure in the placement of those blocks so things don't slip around. Nice. And just take a little walk forward. Cool. In-breath, take the blocks with you, come all the way up. Nice, and exhale, how about that? I'm going to send my gaze behind me so I can watch myself step wide. So this time we're going to see what it's like to use the blocks with a wide leg forward fold. First I'll place them. We might as well start out in a little goddess to warm those legs up, why not? Okay, so let's pretend we're in our class, our flow, and things are warming up. And then I'm going to straighten those legs out. And I'm going to know I've got these blocks in place so that as I exhale, fold with the knees bent, sending the hips back and the forehead forward. Here's my block so that it's like a landing pad for me. And here's where the height option comes in really, really handily. If you don't have the range in the backs of the legs, please don't worry about that, because that's why we have the blocks. All right, and so that's the tall. This is the medium. Here's the low. All right, for some people, you know, the more that you widen your feet, you can come a little more forward, and you may be able to end up with elbows on the blocks. In any event, once again, really helpful to have these in place. I've seen so many people struggle with this shape because they don't have the proper support. Okay, nice, you guys. All right, so I'm going to send the heels in. I'm going to keep the blocks nearby because now I'm going to try Skandasana and then move those blocks with me. Again, I've seen a lot of people struggle with, I don't know what to do with my hands here. Okay, use the blocks. Come on back. Just make sure we're traveling with the blocks or they're traveling with us. Okay, and then so it's great. You've added a little extra length to your arms and you can feel safe to make all of these crazy adjustments in our practices, right? Okay, come back to center, you guys. And the feet are going to travel a little bit closer. And I'll take it down into a wide frog pose for just a moment. And we might as well get back into the legs. Let's go ahead and get nice and tall here. Beautiful. Exhale. So now what I'd like you to try out, my friends, is we'll travel these back to the front of the mat. I'm going to put them out of the way for the moment and walk myself into down face dog. Because it feels great. All right, so what we'll do is we'll come into pigeon pose here by raising up the right leg. And as I exhale, I'm going to send this leg through. And then for a lot of us, I'm going to find out, hey, you know what? This is where I could use a blanket. Because theoretically, what we'd really love is to have our hips be on an equal plane. So if you can notice from this angle, this hip is way down, this one's way up. So what I'd like to do is actually support the hip that's sinking too low with the outside of the blanket. Bang, there it is. Kind of perfect. Okay. Some people like the block, but this is where the blanket comes in really handy. All right, so I like to start tall. And if you want to start really tall, well, heck, you might as well come up here for a moment. And then decide on the exhalation, coming forward. Well, here comes one of those situations where my head doesn't know where to go, all right? So here's where a block comes in, or a blanket. But this is so ideal and so perfect because I see that there's a nice long alignment of the spine rather than my head dipping way down here. I highly recommend using a block or something under the forehead. Nice, you guys. So we'll come back up. And I'm going to place my hands on the floor to exit the shape. And maybe move some stuff around. Beautiful. Well, by this time, the other leg cannot wait for that, for its turn. Here comes the left leg. And, just for the heck of it, I'm going to send my gaze back to make sure that that back leg hasn't wandered off the mat too much. And then as you set your gaze this way, you can see that in this case, I'm kind of even, hips side to side. However, I'm going to use the support. Why fight it? It's interesting, and this is in my experience and in my practice too. I find that my ego gets in the way, unfortunately, and tells me, "Oh, I don't really need that," or "I've never tried it. I'm not going to try it now." Well, don't do that. Try stuff. This is where we get into beginner's mind, and we have a visit with trying something that's unfamiliar, which is kind of why we come to the mat. Try the things that are unfamiliar. Okay. An exhalation sends me down on the elevator. And this time I realized, I think I probably could adjust on this side to the lower setting for my head. So I use the lowest setting on the block. And I drift myself back into the breath with the greatest of ease. Because my body isn't fighting any of the shape. The body is just letting the shape be what it needs to be. Because I'm using proper props. Okay. Gonna come back up. I'm curling the back toe. Use an exhale in the abs to raise up that leg. Come back into down face dog. There's gonna be one more thing I'm gonna show you. So what I'd like you to do is whichever leg steps you forward into the lunge where you can still see me. So we're gonna set up for a couple more shapes and then we're gonna come on down, all right? This time we're gonna set up for warrior two, which means your heels are lined up and there's a nice long line. So get your blocks nearby, probably inside of that foot, and probably on the outside as well. So 2 block system. All right, so the heels are nice and strong, earthing foot so that we feel secure in the shape. And then we're gonna climb ourselves into warrior two with the blocks. Nice. And then in reverse. So as I start to straighten the front leg and I know I'm headed to triangle pose, and I know that I sometimes have a hard time knowing what to do with the downstairs arm, well, here I have this helper right here, right under the shoulder. Check it out. And then it turns out, well, maybe it's not so difficult then to have this nice long stack of shoulders and hands and arms and gaze. Nice. All right. So there's triangle with a block. Once again, numerous settings. It's easy to feel that you're supposed to be way down here in triangle pose. In fact, probably not good because remember we're looking for a long spine. All right, well I might as well take the block with me. We'll visit the other side. We'll just switch on to the other side and see how it works over here. Okay, again, I'm gonna return the blocks to both sides of this leg, just in case, as I come up into my triangle shape, this time with the block on the outside of the leg. Now for me, this is really unfamiliar, which is why I want to try it out. So maybe it turns out I could use the taller block instead. And then I'm going to reverse out. Nice. And then as I exhale, I'm going to come back to that wide leg forward fold with the blocks. In breath halfway up. Use the blocks to come into a nice spinal spin. And exhale. Very nice. And we're going to bring it back down to the floor now, you guys. So heel, toe, heel, toe, heel, toe. And I'm going to come into a little squat here, so you're going to come way down, lengthening the backs of the feet. Nice tall spine, and then exhale your head towards your knees, lengthening the back of the neck. And then come on down to your mat. What I'd like you to do is grab a bolster if you happen to have one. If you don't, it's not a bad idea to have all this stuff in your home practice. So we'll go back into that idea of using the prop for a Sphinx pose. Move my things out of the way. But we'll start with that supported child's pose first. So I'm making sure that the bolster, my head clears the bolster on this side, and that my arms are a little bit wider than my shoulders. And then if it turns out my forehead is dangling and not touching anything, I'm going to move a blanket in place to make sure that there's somewhere for my head to make contact. Beautiful. And so we'll pretend that we were there for a good 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, and then come on up. And then I'm going to start with my hands on the bolster, actually. Get my knees together and start to sink the hips onto that bolster. So the hip creases are aligning with the back end of the bolster. So that as I support my torso tall on my arms, I have this additional height in the hips of the torso up that increases the range of lengthening at the front of the hips. It's really sensational. For some, this is too much. That's where this comes in handy. You can come down to your elbows. And additionally, for a more restorative class, we would add a block to the scene here, like this. So the props aren't only for our very active shapes. The props are also for the restorative, relaxing asana that we'll find our way into. And imagining that we got to stay here for a few minutes. The counter pose to this is, of course, to send our hips back. Now, I'll just briefly explain that there are millions of different ways to use this big bolster. And like I said, it can seem like a little bit extra of a thing to have in your life, but it's really worth it. As I said, when we move forward and do some more postures that are restorative, this is going to come in really handy. So I'm going to take my block and come back to a seat. And just have to sit for a minute or two. Close your eyes. See if you can re-engage with the breath. And see if you could let the eyes of the breath inside of your body investigate any shift or change or qualities that might have come in place for you. Beautiful. And then we'll open the eyes and we'll find our hands at our heart center. And thank you one more time, my friends, for joining me for this. Please do feel free to reach out to my contact information, mj@mjyeager.com for email, if any questions you may have. Thanks again. Namaste.